Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. Amyloidosis is a complex, challenging disease. It's a journey like no other. And what's clear is that patients can't travel this journey alone. Many of us need a support team at some point. But how do you know what you need, where you can turn for help, and who does what? In today's episode, we'll be talking with Linda, an AL amyloidosis patient, about ideas for assembling a support team. Linda, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Thanks so much for having me today.
Of course, we're so happy to have you join our podcast. We've known each other for quite a few years now through the Amyloidosis Speakers Bureau, and I know it's been quite a journey for you. So today's topic, assembling a support team, is one that's likely relevant to all of our listeners at some point during their journey. And you'll notice we use the word team in today's title, as there are situations where needs typically extend beyond the capabilities of a primary caregiver. And while everyone's journey is different, which means support needs may vary, we hope that today's conversation offers helpful thoughts on how to assemble a support team. Being a patient myself, the way I think about assembling a support team is for something specific, like treatment, for example. Something where you'll need extra help and probably for a defined period of time. And for me, that was getting a stem cell transplant. So, say you're going to be starting a new treatment and that requires you to have additional help. Where would you suggest our listeners start? Perhaps first identify your needs. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great discussion topic, Mackenzie. I went through Cyborg D as opposed to the stem cell transplant back in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And I did need help being single and an only child. So I started, and what I would suggest is starting with creating a list of needs, at least those you can think of at the time. For example, categories. Will you be relocating for the duration of that treatment? And if you are, you need to take in consideration your needs at that location, transportation and such, as opposed to who's going to be taking care of your home, apartment, whatever it be, while you're away.
Mm-hmm.
Who will be going with you and things of that nature. Another major issue is transportation. You might need a ride. I know I did, to go to weekly appointments to get treatment and a ride back. Sometimes there are other appointments and so forth. So having that transportation issue solved or at least addressed is always a good thing. Along with, does the person who is taking you need to drive? Will they be borrowing your car? Will you be Ubering together?
Yeah.
There's a lot of options, but addressing that ahead of time is always helpful. There's also in more complicated, I think, situations, maybe it's something that you went through, you need somebody taking notes and tracking things like when you took your medication, side effects, your meal, your food and water, liquid intake, that kind of thing, your weight, your blood pressure, that kind of thing. Meals were a big deal for me. So having help with the meal prep and cleanup and, of course, the grocery shopping was a big help, something for people to think about, as well as things like laundry. Not having dirty laundry build up, not just for yourself, but if there's a family involved, takes a lot of weight off, I think, people's minds, as well as general house chores and cleaning, vacuuming maybe, making sure spills and things like that are cleaned up, little things like that. And of course, then you have errands, chores. Uh, Sometimes things come up where you need a new medication, maybe something to treat a side effect. Can somebody go pick it up? Can you arrange to have it delivered? Uh, Something as basic as having somebody take out your trash.
Yeah.
The little things like that you might not think of right away.
Mhm.
Again, depending on your circumstance, personal hygiene. Will you need help showering or bathing in any way?
Mhm.
And then there's the administrative aspect of all of this. Um, Time waits for no one, and the mail will keep coming in, paper mail, emails, the insurance, um, providers, our general bills from day to day, utilities, and so forth. So having somebody take care of that is a good thing to know as well. And importantly, if you have a spouse who may be your prime support person or not, um, how they're going to manage it if they work, if they don't work. If you have children, are they small children who still need care, need to get to school? Are they grown children who can maybe lend a hand? And do you have pets?
Mhm.
You know, they need to be fed and watered and make sure they don't get out or walked or whatever.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of things to think about. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive list. I'm sure the folks listening could probably think of a few more things, and hopefully they'll add them to the comments of the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning this because it really does an incredible job of illustrating just how extensive a patient's need could be. I mean, just simple things like taking out the trash and getting your mail. I mean, these are not things that are coming to your mind as a patient when you're facing a daunting treatment up ahead. So I think this is a really great foundation for patients to consider. And then building off of that, you can add even more detail into these categories. And personally, I'm not necessarily a fan of over engineering things, but I think it is extraordinarily helpful to have a level of detail for perspective and understanding in terms of how much help you may need. Um, just so when you're able to ask someone for help, you can give a little bit more specifics.
Absolutely. I think everybody's got their own level of comfort in
Hmm.
terms of the amount of detail and, as you call, engineering they want to do in it. But I did find specifics were helpful.
Hmm.
Um, Scheduling and making sure everybody has maybe a copy of the schedule, at least who's in the house, or have it somewhere like on the refrigerator
Hmm.
of who's coming when, who's doing what. Writing things down keeps everybody on that same page.
Yeah.
And it's not just the scheduling, but it can be, for example, if you're feeding pets or your children need to get to sporting events, writing all that stuff down, who gets what. I can speak to the pets, for example, who gets which food and how much.
Hmm.
Um, Not having children, I can't speak to that as well, but certainly I can imagine, you know, this child needs to get to this practice, or this child has a game for this, or whatever it may be.
Yeah. This
Uh,
one likes chicken nuggets and this one doesn't.
exactly,
Same difference.
exactly. Um, Another thing that people may not think of up front, or they might, it's not something I thought of right away, is money. It's a
Mm.
sensitive topic, but is something worth thinking about if you
Mhm.
have folks running errands. And this touches on the fact that you have close family and friends, and then you have maybe another outer circle of friends and family. And then you might get into folks that are you don't know as well, and
Mhm.
then and so forth. Um, will you be giving them cash? Will you be giving them your credit card? Will they be spending their own money or using their own credit card and you'll be reimbursing them? So, how are you going to handle that?
Yeah. That's a great point and one that certainly does need to be considered, ahead of time when you're developing this list. So kind of, continually building on our conversation. Right now we have a list of kind of what our needs are and ways that people can help us. And now it's time to start thinking about who who is currently supporting you and which of your tasks would be assigned to who, right? Delegation.
Exactly. Now you've got column A and column B, right? Your
Mhm.
people and what you need done.
Yep.
Um, so you can certainly earmark who would be good, but you need to communicate with them. You need to ask them, keeping in mind that everybody has their own life. They
Mhm.
have their own demands on their life. Whether it's children, pets, everything that we've talked about.
Mhm.
So being flexible is always good to keep in mind. Communicating exactly what you need and how often so that you're both clear as to whether, they can take it on.
Mhm.
Um, and you may have gaps. You may have been able to cover everything but, let's
Mhm.
just say, taking out the trash.
Yeah.
Maybe it's one of those things that has to happen when everybody's working.
Mhm.
So identifying those gaps is a good idea. And then you have to start thinking further as to how you can fill those gaps.
Yeah.
Some ideas are, do you have local young people, maybe college students, high school students, neighbors, for example, who could give you, oh yeah, sure, I could take out the trash for you once a week, or
Mhm.
if we leave it outside, could you just take it to the curb for me,
Mhm.
kind of a thing. There's also local media sites like Nextdoor. You could post, or perhaps local government services, Meals on Wheels, and
Mhm.
excuse me. There are transportation services that you might qualify for, or be able to schedule with. And then finally, there are agencies that can offer home care. That might be a solution for you to
Mhm.
some level. In my own experience, that's what I needed to do when I was on Cyborg D,
Mhm.
to hire uh, home caregivers to get me through it.
And what was that like? How did it go having someone who would come to your house and help care for you?
It was a mixed experience. I mean, being very independent, I hated the thought.
Mm.
Having to deal with strangers at such a vulnerable time
Mhm.
can be somewhat difficult. But I knew I wasn't going to get through it well without the help.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just have to swallow your pride and accept it is what it is.
Mhm.
And overall, it was a mixed situation. Some things worked out well, other things not so much. But I'm not so sure if I had friends and family, that wouldn't be the case anyway.
Yeah.
Nothing's perfect and nobody's perfect. And again, you just have to be flexible, be willing to pivot and adjust, keep people as backups in mind.
Yeah.
But some of the things I would suggest if people are considering going that route
Mhm.
is to check in with friends, family, colleagues, and so forth if they can recommend an agency they've had experience with. If you get in touch with an agency, see if they'll provide references uh, for the people that they would assign
Mhm.
to your situation. And what is their background? Do they specialize in anything? Do they have experience in what you're going through? In my case, I was looking for somebody who had, or at least one somebody who had some experience with chemotherapy, taking care of somebody with chemotherapy.
Mhm.
In my case, I had an aide who went through chemotherapy. So that was a little more helpful in some ways. Another thing to take into account is it a rotating slate of people depending on how much help you need, or is it the same person? Is it, you know, will you need help for, say, a 24-hour period? Will it be two 12-hour periods or three 8-hour periods? And if that has to repeat, say, once a week on the day of treatment, are they the same people?
Mhm.
Finding out what kind of rotation you have, if there's going to be a rotation, can be helpful.
Mhm.
This way, for me, I like knowing who to expect.
Yeah.
I think we all would. And of course, that means you may have to do some training there with them.
Yeah.
And writing things down is very helpful in that situation.
Mhm.
Another key thing is to find out if the caregivers for the agency are bonded and insured, simply
Mhm.
because accidents happen. Not
Yeah,
that we want them to happen, but unexpected things happen.
always.
Again, there's probably some other things that folks listening can think of, and hopefully, again, they'll post them to help others in the comments section.
Mhm. You make some really good points for people to consider, when they're thinking about going through an agency. And what this also tells me is that depending on the extent of the needs that you identify as a patient, especially those that are more complicated or those that may kind of extend over a longer period of time, it very well may result in a support team with a handful of folks, and not just one single primary caregiver. And someone might need to be maybe an overall coordinator of the support team, and keeping in mind that you probably just don't want to focus on you. So I think,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, and just another benefit of having specific tasks is you can avoid maybe unneeded or maybe unnecessary support. And of course, people have huge hearts and the best of intentions when they're helping, their friends or their family or whatnot. But sometimes it's not always helpful. And I know I've certainly experienced this, but I'd love to know if you've also experienced this as well.
Yes, and to reiterate what you're saying, it definitely takes a village for the support team. And I've had uh, a couple of unfortunate experiences with well-meaning family.
Mhm.
I had a relative want to bring me food, which is always welcome,
Mhm.
whether I'm going through a treatment or not. And unfortunately, with Cyborg D, uh, the day of a treatment and the day after, I would be queasy and I had a sensitive stomach. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, it was only 2 days a week.
Yeah.
So a relative of mine brought, I mean, a large pot of chicken soup and a similar sized pot of marinara sauce with meatballs.
Mm.
Under other circumstances, it would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
The soup was wonderful at the time. Now, during treatment, the soup was fantastic. It was very soothing. I had trouble eating different foods, so the soup just sat very well with me, and it was
Mhm.
so good and it worked so well. I continued to make it with help
Mhm.
throughout the duration. Unfortunately, the meatballs were a little too much for my stomach, and they gave me indigestion. And didn't want to lie to my relative, and she couldn't understand why I couldn't eat them. And
Yeah.
I think that had a lot to do with denial. Again, where we get into the closer the family member is, the more emotional investment they have. And,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes they hear things, sometimes they don't.
Mhm.
We worked it out. Uh, I have another relative in the area who took the meatballs, which was good. But it comes down to communication and
Yeah.
remembering not everybody hears things the same way.
Mhm.
Um, Being specific, communication, it's very helpful if the person who wants to help will ask what you can eat or don't eat, can eat,
Mhm.
or would
Mhm.
prefer not to eat before they bring something over,
Yeah.
especially a giant pot of it. It can be difficult too, because sometimes we don't even know ourselves
Yeah.
what to say.
Yeah.
And so it was a 50-50 thing for me. The soup worked out well, the
Yeah.
marinara not so well. So I would still call that a win.
Yeah.
But if you can, sometimes it's better not to ask.
Mhm.
Sometimes just sending over maybe with Instacart or just bringing over some chicken soup, some cans of soup. It's a tough thing, but communication is at the core.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point, and I just want to build on that point. I think also, at least from my experience, I remember, sometimes a lot of these chemotherapies and these drugs can really affect your taste, right? Not only do you have a sensitive stomach, but your taste buds are all out of whack. I remember foods that I absolutely loved became genuinely repulsive. Like I couldn't. stomach just the taste of it. And like you said, us as patients, sometimes we don't even know. It's unpredictable and sometimes it happens and sometimes it don't. So, as a caregiver or someone providing support, maybe adding a little bit more flexibility in terms of food and how you help other people. I think the Instacart is a great suggestion. It just gives the patient a greater chance of finding value in the help that you bring. So I think that's a really great point that you illustrated. It just brought me back to when I couldn't stand the taste of coffee, and that was just devastating. I mean, it really was. Um, but again, people are well-meaning, and sometimes what they think you need is different than what you actually need. They offer, to no fault of their own, right? They offer support
Mhm,
through their lens naturally,
mhm,
and sometimes opposed to just listening to what you ask for, like you mentioned. So, for sure, an important reason why being specific as a patient in terms of what are the things that you need, in terms of, maybe more of the chicken noodle soup, but next time leave out the meatballs as much as I love them, kind of thing.
exactly. I mean, you don't even know, like you said, everybody knew you liked coffee, I assume. People
Yeah.
knew I liked meatballs, so
Yeah.
they brought what I liked when I wasn't in treatment,
Hmm. Yeah.
and nobody we didn't realize.
Yeah. You don't know till you
So,
try.
yeah, exactly, so
Yeah, offering up those suggestions, something like Instacart, I think that's a fantastic idea to really give you flexibility. And sometimes you just don't know as a patient what you want to eat until it's spur of the moment.
mhm.
And a lot of the times you're not hungry, and then all of a sudden out of the blue you have a craving for saltine crackers, and it's like, shit, quick, go get the crackers. She wants to eat for the first time in 3 days. So I think food is a really tough way to support patients, but it's an important way that we can be helped. But all of this kind of stems around the idea of it's important to stay flexible and things can change.
Exactly. And to that point, it might be helpful to warn the people that are helping you,
Yeah.
if you can, maybe not
Hmm.
beforehand, but as you go through it. Oh, by the way,
Yeah. But staying flexible and really communicating with the people who are there to support you is just so essential.
absolutely. And also to keep in mind that your support team members have, again, lives of their own.
Hmm.
And there can be things that happen in their life that's unexpected, whether it's an emergency with a child or what have you, or something else comes up and they're just unavailable. So, as you said, flexibility is key. And,
Yeah.
sometimes they get burned out too.
Hmm.
So you have to give them a chance to recharge a little bit
Yeah. That's a great
sometimes.
point. And also there are situations where maybe you have a friend who offers to help you, but maybe it's more of a one-time help, or is it more of an ongoing support kind of help? What are they able to do? Like we said, maybe buy groceries, the prepared meals with an asterisk. Having people buy you groceries on Instacart and having it delivered is a great way. Getting gift cards for people. Amazon could be a really helpful way,
Mhm.
and you can buy just about anything that you need. Another idea is if you have young children as a patient, right? You could have help with dropping them off or picking them up from school, taking them to and from their practices or recitals, whatever that may be, and even just taking your kids for an afternoon so you can have just a couple of hours to yourself. It's also the little things like you mentioned earlier, picking up mail from your mailbox, watering your plants, little chores around the house, running errands. These small things can go such a long ways, and they really do add up when you are in need of help. We should also mention that when you're going through tough times like this, it's so so important that we consider the mental health aspect of these things.
In terms of one-time support actions,
Hmm.
if you will, um, my treatment ran from winter through spring,
Hmm.
and I had to get my front garden cleaned up because of my homeowners association. And a neighbor of mine came over one day. I was sitting outside getting a little bit of air, and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I told him what was going on
Mhm.
and with me, and he said, "Would you like me to clean up the garden for you?"
Aw.
And I was so touched and so appreciative. And he did that for me. It was a one-time thing,
Mhm.
but it was a big stress off my shoulders that I had to worry about this.
Yeah,
So, yes, those one-time offers uh, can be worth more than people may think. Oh, I can only do
absolutely.
this for somebody.
Yeah.
Give it a try. You never know.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really is just as valuable because that one-time thing may just happen to be something that your ongoing support givers might not be able to help you with. So, I'm glad you shared that story because I it really does illustrate that any help is help, right?
Exactly. And as far as the mental health, I mean, it's just, as you know, it's a very stressful time
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
and certainly for our families and friends as well.
Mhm.
In my case, it was a matter of, and certainly speak to this if you'd like, I didn't know whether I was living or dying.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I was going to be able to work again.
Yeah.
Is the treatment working or not? It's all kinds of stressors come into play, and sometimes I would be able to talk to some friends or some family
Mhm.
and talk about my concerns.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes I would get a call from a colleague. Um, And sometimes I just wanted to hear about things at work
Yeah.
or things in their life because I'm tired of thinking about me. You
Yeah.
need a break from your own life.
Yeah.
Um, and I also found that getting some professional support helped too.
Yeah.
It's okay not to feel okay, as I'm
Yeah.
sure you're aware. There's a certain amount of anger and depression as we go through the process. And having somebody who is completely objective,
Yeah.
again, not emotionally invested in my situation,
Yeah.
to be able to talk to about this because family and friends don't want to hear, at least in my experience, "I'm afraid I'm going to die."
Yeah.
And whether that's true or not, in relatively speaking, it's still something that can come up. Now
Yeah.
that's a big thing,
Mhm.
but being able to vent and talk to somebody who is completely objective and outside the situation was very helpful for me as well
Yeah.
because it's probably going to happen, and as I said, it's okay to not feel okay.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's a real issue we face as patients, right? You mentioned kind of some of those things that concern us, right? Is the treatment working? What's our future look like? Are we going to live or are we not? And I think a lot of the times as patients, it's so important to have a good, strong support system and having friends and family you can talk to and share these concerns. And I'm very fortunate that I do. But there are also sometimes as a patient where you're afraid to share these things. I think for at least me personally, I think sometimes you're afraid to share your concerns with them because you don't want to make them concerned.
Exactly.
Right? You don't want to, they're already worried. They already have a lot to deal with as being a caregiver and watching a loved one go through something arguably traumatic that you don't want to kind of heighten and elevate the concerns and the fears that they already have. So you make such a wonderful point in that it's okay to go and seek that
Hmm.
unbiased third party that there's tremendous value in being able to speak to a therapist and share these concerns and kind of almost release that fear that you have as a patient by sharing that with people that you love.
Exactly. And in this day and age, a lot of therapists are willing to speak to you by phone.
Yeah.
So it could be something that you do that they don't even know about if you don't want them to know.
Yeah.
Uh, but yes, exactly. Family and friends already have those fears, as you pointed out. Us talking about it doesn't seem to help.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't
Yes.
help them. It doesn't help you. It just makes things, I think, more intense and complicated. So yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, Linda, it was an absolute pleasure to have you join us today. I'm so grateful that you were here to share some really valuable insights for our audience. And I just want to reiterate some of the key takeaways of the things that we talked about today, in terms of thinking about what needs to be considered when you're thinking about assembling a support team. Just a couple of these are things like, when you face a significant period ahead as a patient, such as undergoing a new treatment, there is value and it is helpful to be thinking forward in terms of what your needs might be, what support that you currently have, and what are the gaps that need attention now. Because as you go through these things, things slip. Ultimately, as a patient, you're focused on you, right? And you almost kind of get these blinders on, and it's just about getting through whatever the next step is. So to the extent that you can, thinking forward about your needs and working on putting those pieces together and lining up your ducks is very important, right? Advanced planning cannot be underestimated in
Absolutely.
situations like this. And then lastly, things rarely go perfectly as planned, right? Having a
Mhm.
degree of flexibility and trust in the people that you've selected to support you is is really beneficial, and I think will help with being able to focus on just getting better.
I couldn't agree more.
Mm,
And I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences to help others. So
yes.
thank you for that opportunity.
Of course, it was really wonderful to have this discussion, and I think it's gonna be tremendously valuable to a lot of members of our audience, so thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's Mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.